Let's just talk a little bit more about that game the other day then, before we kind of look ahead to Thursday night, where it all hinges on for Spurs. There was a lot of mistakes in that Wolves game. I mean, Vicario, first half, pretty much gifted Wolves 2 goals. Romero, Bergvall, errors in the second half. Ange's comments were a little bit odd. He said it's unusual for us. It all happened in one game and got punished. It's not like they're doing it on purpose. They're not lapses, just individual errors. I also heard him say that they didn't really concede many big chances in that game, but they lost the game by 4-2. So there are big chances. I've seen all season a lot of individual errors. Actually countless times, particularly for me from Romero. It sounds like I'm on a Romero hate campaign, but I've seen so many individual moments where he's lost someone. The Gabriel one springs to mind the most for me, early doors with Arsenal. It is a usual thing. It happens every week. So why is it that Ange says this is not a usual thing to happen?
Yeah, I think a lot of people found his comments in the press conference after the Wolves game quite unconvincing. I think that he can be a really good talker in media situations. Like he can give brilliant press conferences. I've sat through some of them where I think he can be really clever and interesting and honest and persuasive. I think at the moment, I just think he's getting so much stick that I feel like he's gone into a shell quite a lot with the media recently.
Yeah.
I think he's a bit more defensive. I think he's just trying to get through his media commitments, and on to the next game. And that's why he'll come out with stuff, which I think, when you read it back, I remember thinking, I'm not really sure if I completely agree with this. I don't find it very convincing. But I just think he's kind of in defensive mode at the moment.
But he needs to be honest, though. Obviously there is individual performances which haven't been good. But the system itself seems to be a real problem, because I'm not really seeing the system. I'll give it to them. I saw it on Thursday night. I could understand the Angeball. I was seeing the inverting wingers, whatever. But in terms of the system, I look at the defensive frailties of Spurs. You can literally fit a bus between the centre-backs. Yeah. There's no midfield, completely bypassed. So I look at the start of last season where we had full-flowing, lovely Angeball to now, and I can't understand how the parallel is so massive. And the parallel between the person as well. If you really believe in your system and you want to implement that, are they not buying into your system? Can they not do the system?
I think part of this is because if you're bringing in a lot of players who've not really played much recently, who look a little bit out of touch, out of form, then it's very and you're placing these kind of difficult tactical demands on them. It can be quite difficult for the players to get up to speed. You need to,
because it's so high intensity.
I think so. The way I think of Angeball sometimes, it's a bit of a house of cards. Yeah. It's like everything needs to be perfect, and if everything's perfect, it can work well. If like a house of cards, you take one bit out, one bit's in the wrong place, the whole thing falls apart. And so if you're trying to play aggressive attacking football, high up the pitch and everything, with players who don't get their positioning perfectly, it can be a disaster. We've all seen the footage from the Wolves game. Yeah. And the number of times Wolves are just, Spurs give the ball away, and 2 seconds later, you've got 3 Wolves players bearing down on goal, and the Wolves are about to create a massive chance. And for me, this is maybe one of the biggest weaknesses of how Tottenham have played this season, is they make one little mistake, and 2 seconds later, the opposition got a huge chance.
Every time they lose the ball. It shouldn't
be that easy. You shouldn't go from one little mistake to huge chance to the opposition. It happens every week for Tottenham.
So is that then on the manager? Does that lie with the manager, or does that lie with the players and not being able to implement what he wants?
Bit of both, I think. Ultimately, the manager picks the players. The manager sets the tactics. Equally, the players have not played well. The players, you talked earlier about motivation of the players. I don't think the players have really shown enough in terms of motivation and standards and mentality and commitment this season at all. So I think, like I said earlier, there's more than enough blame to go around. I think you have to you can't just blame the players. You can't just blame the manager. I do think a lot of it stems from bringing in out of form, out of touch players in trying to play a very difficult system.
Yeah.
The players don't look up to speed. They don't. Sometimes when you watch games like Wolves, you think, do they even understand what they're trying to do on the pitch? I'm not sure.
That's where I'm at with it, because I was very much Angean, actually, probably until the Chelsea game. I still backed him for, I don't really know why. I think I was just clinging on to something positive. And I just always felt like maybe when the players come back, we'll start to see a little bit more consistency. He had a hell of a lot of injuries. It's been a really difficult season. I just was like, I want some stability. I've seen so many managers come in, and we've had every different style of manager. And I just thought, I really just want this to work. But then the level of performance I saw against Chelsea, which for me was the probably the worst Chelsea derby I've actually ever seen us have. The lack of commitment to that, the lack of intensity. I don't expect Spurs Chelsea to look how that did. And that's when I thought, okay, no, I'm out here, because he's also stood there cupping his ear. And I just kind of felt, be honest when you come out in the media after and just own it. Just say, I cut my ear because they booed my substitution decisions. Don't then say, no, I wanted to hear them celebrate. I mean, if you're going to do that, just at least wait for the VAR check to be done. So I kind of lost a little bit of respect in that sense for him, because he'd always been a very honest person, and people say he's prickly, whatever. And I can imagine in the dressing room, when you've lost 17 times, 21 times in all competitions, he's not going to be the warmest, fluffiest man ever. But then I look at what we're going to do moving forward. I assume if Spurs don't go through on Thursday night, he will probably be sacked straight away. I can't see him finishing the season, in my opinion. What do Spurs do next?
Well, we don't know 100% yet exactly what will happen. I think it's difficult to see how he could be manager for the start of next season. At the moment, I guess if they don't win the Europa League, my assumption is that he won't be the manager. I don't know whether that would come immediately or at the end of the season. If they do win the Europa League, that obviously changes things a bit. Though that said, I've heard some people say, well, what if it's like Erik ten Hag? Erik ten Hag, obviously, Manchester United were it sounds like Manchester United had almost made up their mind to sack Ten Hag in the end of the 23-24 season. Then they surprisingly beat Manchester City in the FA Cup final. Ten Hag stays, but then they sacked him a few months later anyway, and it felt like a little bit of a waste of time. If they were going to do it, maybe they should have done it after the FA Cup final anyway. They sacked Louis van Gaal after he won the FA Cup in 2016. So it's a little bit unclear, but at the moment, I would be surprised if Postecoglou is in charge at the start of the next season. I think he seems to know that. He seems to be fairly open, I think, on this point.
He's kind of alluded to that. He's kind of said, to various journalists, you've already said I'm not going to be
in a press conference the other day. I think the phrase he used was, there is a general sentiment that I might not be here next season, even if I win the Europa League. So, Postecoglou is a smart guy. I think he understands which way the wind is blowing. But then I guess the next question is, if he's not the manager anymore, then who will be the manager to start the next season? I think they'd have to start, I think they would already be thinking very seriously behind the scenes about who that's going to be. My information is that their first choice would be Andoni Iraola, the Bournemouth manager. I think there's also interest in Marco Silva at Fulham, Thomas Frank at Brentford. I've seen a few outlets have been reporting they'd be interested in Oliver Glasner at Crystal Palace, who'd make a lot of sense. I think one thing that unites all four of those guys, Premier League experience. They brought in a manager in Postecoglou who hadn't worked in the Premier League before. He'd done really well in lots of other jobs all around the world. He'd done really well at Celtic, where he'd won everything. So he came in with, I think, a really good CV, but he wasn't tested in the Premier League. And I think a lot of people have looked at Postecoglou this season and thought, maybe his ideas are a little bit too idealistic for the Premier League. Maybe in the Premier League, you need to be a little bit more pragmatic. You need to be a little bit more flexible. And so this, I think, has become the prevailing narrative about Postecoglou, right? Is that lack of Premier League experience has cost him. What I would say, on the other hand, is that he did really well in the Premier League last season. He managed a rebuild. They came fifth. They should actually have come higher. They should have come top four, if we're honest. But then they massively faded at the back end of the season, let Aston Villa get there. And maybe if they come fourth, they would have had a better summer, spent more money. They would have had a better season this season. Who knows? So I don't think it's just to do with not having Premier League experience that why Postecoglou struggled so much this season. But I think if Postecoglou does go, Premier League experience will become paramount in Tottenham's search for another manager. And so I would be very surprised if it was somebody other than those four names I mentioned: Iraola, Frank, Silva, Glasner. I
think also you need to have a manager that's a bit like Pochettino in the sense that can kind of work with not too much budget. And I think someone like an Iraola, for example, or even a Thomas Frank that you mentioned, probably fit that quite well. Because again, Bournemouth have had a pretty good season. Look, they're dropping off a little bit of late, but for the expectation of where Bournemouth should be, they're massively overachieving. Brentford, the structure that they've had has been unbelievable. That's really what's made them and cemented them into the Premier League. So I think those two would be a great fit in terms of the budget and the spending. Do you think that it's a case that when you look at the parallels to last season, to this season, April last year, just to look back, Spurs were fifth in the table with 60 points. This year, 15th on 37 points. So you can just see how crazy the disparity is between the two. Do you think that's because the players themselves just don't really buy into him? They know he's not going to be a long-term fixture there. Have they just down tools now for him as well?
I don't think so. I think the players have been really loyal to the manager, actually. I think that if you look back to, say, the Mourinho era or the Conte era, it was really clear, like in the manager's second season, that the players weren't happy, they weren't having it, they didn't like the style of football, they didn't like the training, they didn't like the manager's personality. And, in both those situations, Tottenham's form absolutely collapsed. And Mourinho got sacked in April, Conte got sacked in March of his second season.
We haven't really had a collapse. It's just been a whole season of collapse.
But they've not been. I have not really got the impression, maybe in the last few weeks, but generally this season, I haven't got the impression that the players have given up on the manager. I think they like him. They like the style of play. They want to make it work. And we talked earlier about like the flashes of good football that we've seen recently. Like AZ Alkmaar at home, for example, or Eintracht Frankfurt at home second half. So I think there's something which is still alive there, only just.
They're fleeting.
Fleeting, exactly moments. Right. Fleeting moments. So I don't think it's quite as bad as a sort of Conte or Mourinho scenario. But equally, everybody ultimately will all come down to results. So people will look at the league table, and I think that more than anything else will decide his future.
I agree with you. It's not toxic in the way that it was with Conte or Jose, or even with Nuno. Bless him. He wasn't even there long enough. But how it was around that time, it's not anger, it's apathy.
Yeah.
And in all honesty, I feel like apathy is probably the worst place you can be at any point in life with anything, because when you just don't care anymore, you just see people, like you mentioned at the start of the show. It's the shrug. Oh, okay, we've got another game. Oh, okay, we've lost another game. Like, it shouldn't be like that.